You're listening to the fourth disc of a 5-disc teaching on Daniel's message on the Third Temple. Enjoy.
Well, we're in our fourth week of our third temple study, if that makes sense to you. And over the last 3 weeks, we've covered an abundant amount of evidence to show the third temple will in fact be celestial in nature. And so for clarity's sake, I want to address 3 specific points of interest that really seem to shape and form people's eschatological or end-time ideology, their beliefs regarding the third temple. The first item I want to cover is something known as the Abomination of Desolation. And the second item we're going to cover is a passage that is it's a statement actually made by Paul to the Thessalonians, found in his second epistle, regarding the son of perdition. An individual who sits as God, showing himself that he is God, in the temple of God. And then the third item that we're going to cover is Ezekiel's temple, what most people are calling the third temple. Now, unfortunately, because of time, I'm only going to be able to cover one of these items today. So today's sermon, I'm going to be addressing the Abomination of Desolation. Now, this is a term which originates in the book of Daniel, and it's a term which some believers of today utilize to validate their claim that the third temple will in fact be built here according to the flesh. Now, I think it's important also that you note that to a Jew who lived in the days of Yeshua, the abomination of desolation was fulfilled. It was clearly understood to be fulfilled because of an event in 167 BC. It was an invasion in Jerusalem by a man named Antiochus Epiphanes. And history records that Antiochus, he halted the service of the temple. He prevented the sacrifices. He sets up an abominable image, and he himself sacrifices a pig, an unclean animal, on the holy altar of God. And then, if that wasn't enough, he renames the holy temple of God the temple Zeus. And as a result of Antiochus's wicked behavior, a revolt rose up by a Jewish army known as the Maccabees, more commonly known today as the Maccabees. And because God was with them, they were victorious in the revolt, and they repelled the Seleucid regime. And on the 25th of Kislev, 164 BC, the temple was rededicated. The temple services resumed as prescribed in Torah. This event consequently led to a celebration that is upon us shortly in the next couple weeks, Hanukkah. Now, if you read the book of Daniel, you're going to discover that Daniel does in fact prophesy of Antiochus's desolation, okay? And it does so with stunning accuracy. There's absolutely no doubt whatsoever in my mind or in the Jewish mind that this prophecy was fulfilled with the conquest of Antiochus. So where does this ideology, theology, eschatology derive concerning the fact that the abomination of desolation has yet to be fulfilled? Well, it actually comes from a statement made by Yeshua. And he was privately speaking with his disciples at this time on the Mount of Olives. And this is what he says. He says, "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains." So based upon the words of Yeshua, we see how one could interpret that the abomination of desolation has yet to be fulfilled. But there's something interesting about this passage here in Matthew, and that is this little statement Yeshua makes. He says, whoever reads, let him understand. If you go to the Greek on this, it's only 2 Greek words. Noeo simply means understand, but then there's also this Greek word, anagnosko. It means to know again. Okay? Let's go back to this. The statement made by Yeshua, whoever reads, let him understand, really is an alert to notify the recipients that this passage requires deeper understanding. It requires spiritual understanding, and that the event would happen again. A great example of this, an example of showing you how this works, is with John the Baptist. If you remember in Matthew chapter 11, Yeshua is talking to his disciples and telling them of John the Baptist. And he says something to them. He says, and if you are willing to receive it, he is Elijah who is to come. And then he says something amazing. He says, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. Now, having said that, is it possible that there could be more than one abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet? The answer is yes. Because of time, I'm not going to go through all the prophecies in Daniel, but let me say this. If you read Daniel's prophecy in chapter 8, you realize that this prophecy foretells of Antiochus' rise to power, his siege on Jerusalem, in amazing detail. Remarkable accuracy, thus clearly showing the prophecy regarding Antiochus truly to be fulfilled. But if you continue to read on to Daniel chapter 9, you realize that Daniel continues to speak about the abomination of desolation. However, the details given in chapter 9 are just a bit different. And he indicates that it's a different abomination of desolation. And chapter 9 provides us with specific details that refer to a specific moment in time. A time that takes place just after the departure of the Messiah. I want to read this passage to you. Pay close attention. There's a lot of details here. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. So what's going on here? We got to get into the frame of time here. Daniel was written while he was in captivity, right? The first temple, right? So here we go. He's in captivity. He's writing this. He sees his vision. And he says that from the going forth of the command to restore, to rebuild Jerusalem until what? The Messiah, the Prince. We are given a specific moment in time regarding this passage because it's the introduction of the Mashiach. Then we say, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublesome times, which it was. Read the story. And after 62 weeks, Messiah, the Mashiach, shall be cut off, but not for himself. You are given a very specific moment in time so that you can render this text in its most accurate form. And that is the death of our Messiah. And it's interesting here, it says that he shall be cut off, but not for himself. Yeshua came to die for the world, for the sins of the world, that we might have life. He didn't die for himself. And the people of the Prince who is to come, interesting, right after the death of the Messiah, we're talking about the people of the Prince who is to come. And they do this, shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end of it shall be with a flood. In other words, desolation. Until the end of war, desolations are determined. Verse 27. Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. There are specific details that you have got to get embedded into your mind. And on the wing of abomination shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate. Now there's an old saying, and I'm just paraphrasing, but those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. In other words, one may act unwisely by stepping into the future by being ignorant of the events that happened in the past. And when dealing with Bible prophecy, it is of the utmost importance that one know his history so that he may avoid making tragic mistakes along the way. Now we have to ask ourselves, has there ever been a time in history where these events have taken place? Just as Yeshua foretold regarding Daniel's prophecy, the abomination of desolation. The answer is obviously yes, it has. And again, it has done so with stunning accuracy. If you go back to 70 AD, you will find that the Roman armies had literally entirely surrounded the holy city of Jerusalem, being led by their general, Titus, who was actually the son of the emperor at the time, Vespasian. He led an invasion on Jerusalem, breached the walls, destroyed the temple, destroyed the sanctuary, thus putting an end to sacrifice and offering. And they did so on the very exact same date that it happened to the first temple, the 9th of Av. Now, Josephus, who is a first century Jewish historian, was a man who devoted much of his time to documenting and recording this event, the destruction of the temple, and the preceding events. And he describes the siege of Jerusalem as one of the most bloodiest in history. He states that disease and famine wreaked havoc so much upon the Jewish nation that they were being stacked like cords of wood. It's pretty amazing. The land itself was completely destroyed. It was left unrecognizable. Truly, the best way to describe this event is the abomination of desolation. Josephus explains it this way. Listen to what he says. The Romans, though it was a terrible struggle to collect the timber, raised their platforms in 21 days, having, as described before, stripped the whole area in a circle round the town for a distance of 10 miles. The countryside, like the city, was a pitiful sight. For once there had been a lovely vista of woods and parks, there was nothing there but desert and stumps of trees. No one, not even a foreigner, who had seen the old Judea and the glorious suburbs of the city, and now set eyes on her present desolation, could have helped sighing and groaning at such terrible change. For every trace of beauty had been blotted out by war, and nobody who had known in the past and came upon it suddenly would have recognized the place. When he was already there, he would still have been looking for the city. This is Josephus' detailed account. And truly, it puts things into perspective for us who weren't even there. This is an important part of biblical history that provides us with valuable evidence that needs to be taken into consideration when we investigate the abomination of desolation as prophesied by Yeshua. Now, someone get me a water, please. Now, keep in mind that this event left the holy city of Jerusalem completely desolate. There was nothing left. No such event has ever taken place in the history of the world, either before this destruction or after. I want to take you back to Yeshua's prophecy regarding the abomination of desolation and point out a few things here. Okay. Yeshua says, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. There's that statement again. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Now, when most people read this passage, they are often given to the preconceived notion that the Antichrist will come, defile the temple, he's going to erect some image in the temple, or something to that effect, and the abomination of desolation is going to be fulfilled. Now, in defense of those with these preconceived notions, the event that took place with Antiochus Epiphanes would be consistent with that theology. It would. But that wouldn't be consistent with the abomination of desolation of which Yeshua spoke. And let me explain why it wouldn't be. If you look closely at the words of Yeshua in Daniel chapter 9, you realize that this abomination of desolation is one of complete destruction. Very different than chapter 8. This is one of complete destruction. The city, the sanctuary are destroyed. This is a stark contrast to the abomination in Daniel chapter 8, which Antiochus' conquest is revealed. See, in Daniel chapter 8, we find out something very different takes place. In Daniel chapter 8, we see that the sanctuary is not destroyed. the sanctuary in verse 14 is cleansed. This is very different. Now I want to show you how Luke records the very same passage as Matthew, but he does it in a little different way, and it gives us a deeper insight into the abomination of desolation. This is Luke's account. He says, "But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains." So, what Yeshua is saying in Matthew in regard to the abomination of desolation, standing in the holy place, Luke translates into the Roman army standing encircling the holy place, the holy city, Jerusalem. Now let's continue in Matthew's account of Yeshua's discourse on the abomination of desolation. "Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house, and let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days, and pray that your flight may not be in the winter and the Sabbath." Now listen. "For then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world until this time, nor shall ever be." The desolation that Yeshua is referring to is so monumental, the city would never experience anything like it, either in its history or in its future. And Josephus gives us an account of the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, and listen to his account here. To give a detailed account of their outrageous conduct, speaking of the Romans, is impossible. But we may sum it up by saying that no other city has ever endured such horrors. No generation in history has fathered such wickedness. In the end, they brought the whole Hebrew race into contempt in order to make their own impiety seem less outrageous in foreign eyes, and confessed the painful truth that they were slaves, the dregs of humanity, illegitimate and outcasts of their nation. Truly, the destruction of the Second Temple was the abomination of desolation, just as Yeshua prophesied. The entire city was left desolate. The temple was destroyed. Sacrifice and offering were brought to an end. And to this very day, the Temple Mount stands desolate. To this very day, the sacrifice and offerings ceased to exist. I want to show you what Yeshua prophesies concerning what the outcome of the temple would be. After, again, we're given a fragment, a moment in time to understand biblical prophecy here, but he's going to show us what the outcome of the temple would be at the abomination of desolation. Listen to this. Matthew 23:37. "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her, how often I wanted to gather your children as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate." Yeshua prophesies that the outcome of the abomination of desolation was that the temple would be left desolate. Now listen to Yeshua's following statement. The very next statement. Listen to what he says. "For I say to you, you shall see me no more till you say, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." We are given specific details. And if we are careful in addressing biblical prophecy, we will see them. Yeshua doesn't say here, your house is left to you desolate, but it will be rebuilt with sacrifice and offerings resuming thereafter. And then I will return to you. That's not what Yeshua says. Yeshua indicates that it will be desolate until he returns. And this makes perfect sense because at that time, he will be returning and revealing the celestial temple, the temple of which he stands high priest over. Matthew 24, verse 1, Yeshua says, he continues in this passage, "Then Yeshua went out and departed from the temple. His disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple, and Yeshua said to them, Do you not see all these things? Assuredly I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down." 70 AD, this prophecy came true. Not one stone was left upon another. You know, it's said that when the Romans lit the fire to the sanctuary, that the fire burned so hot that it completely melted all of the gold and silver within her that hadn't been plundered. And because of their greed, after the fire went out, they went back and they literally picked it apart stone by stone with iron bars, because the gold and the silver had melted into the cracks of the floor, into the mortar joints, and they wanted the gold and the silver. Thus, quite literally, not one stone was left standing upon another. Exactly how Yeshua prophesied it would happen. Now, I want to go back to Luke's account of Yeshua's discourse on the Abomination of Desolation. Now, I want to draw your attention to Yeshua's specific instructions concerning AD 70, concerning this desolation. Listen. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. There's your instructions. Let those who are in the midst of her depart. Let not those who are in the country enter her. You're outside, don't come in. For these are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. So here we see Yeshua gives his disciples advice concerning the abomination of desolation. Yeshua says, when you see these armies encircling the town, get out. Josephus records that the event was so horrific that over 1.1 million Jews died. And that doesn't include the number of Jews that were taken into captivity, which is estimated almost 100 more thousand. There was nothing left. There was nothing. Now, what I find to be so interesting is that history records that there were supernatural signs leading up to this desolation. In other words, Yeshua had given those in Jerusalem every opportunity to get out. And those signs actually began to be revealed years before the destruction. It's not like Yeshua gave them a 10-minute warning. Josephus gives us a detailed account of several different miraculous signs that occurred prior to Jerusalem's destruction in 70 AD, signs that foretold of Jerusalem's coming destruction. Now, I need to set the stage here before I show you this passage by Josephus by explaining that Josephus' opening statement, he is referring to the false prophets that were going out and about in Jerusalem, telling everyone everything is going to be okay. Peace, peace. They were comforting the people. Ironically, this is the exact same thing the false prophets did in the book of Jeremiah before the Babylonians came in. Exact same thing. Listen to these miraculous. I'm going to go a ways here. I cut out a lot here, you guys, but I had to keep this much because you got to see some of the stuff that took place. We got to know our history. Thus there were miserable people persuaded by these deceivers. He's referring to the false prophets. And such as Belial God himself, while they did not attend nor give credit to the signs that were so evident, and did so plainly foretell their future desolation, but like men infatuated without either eyes to see or minds to consider, sounds familiar, don't it? Did not regard the denunciations that God made to them. Thus, there was a star resembling a sword, which stood over the city, and a comet that continued a whole year. Thus also before the Jews' rebellion, and before those commotions which preceded the war, when the people were come in great crowds to the feast of unleavened bread, on the 8th day of the month of Nisan, at the 9th hour of the night, so great a light shone around the altar and the holy house, that it appeared to be bright daytime, which lasted for a half an hour. This light seemed to be a good sign to the unskillful, but was so interpreted by the sacred scribes as to portend those events that followed immediately upon them. At the same festival, listen to this, you guys, a heifer, as she was led by the high priest to be sacrificed, brought forth a lamb in the midst of a temple. Moreover, the eastern gate of the inner court of the temple, which was of brass and vastly heavy, and had been with difficulty shut by 20 men, and rested upon a basis armed with iron, and had bolts fastened very deep into the firm floor, which was there made of one entire stone, was seen to be open of its own accord about the 6th hour of the night. Now those who kept watch in the temple came hereupon running to the captain of the temple and told him of it, who then came up thither, and not without great difficulty was able to shut the gate again. This also appeared to the vulgar to be a very happy prodigy, as if God did thereby open them the gate of happiness. But the men of learning understood it, that the security of their holy house was dissolved of its own accord, and that the gate was opened for the advantage of their enemies. So these publicly declared that the signal foreshadowed the desolation that was coming upon them. Because these, a few days after the feast, on the 21st day of the month of Iyar, a certain prodigious and incredible phenomenon appeared. Listen to this, you guys. I suppose the account of it would seem to be a fable, were it not related to those that saw it, and were not the events that followed it so considerable a nature as to deserve such signals. For before sunsetting, chariots and troops of soldiers in their armor were seen running about among the clouds, surrounding the cities. Now, I wanted to show you these things so that you can see how amazing and these wondrous signs that took place, and that Yeshua's statement regarding the coming desolation was clearly understood through these supernatural signs by all who had eyes to see and ears to hear. When it comes to biblical prophecy, it is imperative to know our history before attempting to formulate a concrete theology into the future. Because make no mistake about it, the Romans destroyed the holy city of Jerusalem. They destroyed the temple, exactly as Yeshua said it would happen. Exactly how Daniel prophesied in Daniel chapter 9 that it would come to pass. Jerusalem suffered utter desolation. Sacrificing and offerings have been brought to an end. Now I want to note that Josephus was an eyewitness to these accounts. He was an eyewitness of all these things. He was a Jew who was familiar with the Word of God, with his Tanakh. And I only mention this because he has this to say regarding the abomination of desolation. Listen to what he says. This is his take on it. And indeed, it so came to pass that our nation suffered these things under Antiochus Epiphanes, according to Daniel's vision. And he wrote many years before that they came to pass in the very same manner. Daniel also wrote concerning the Roman government, and that our country should be made desolate by them. Josephus clearly understood that Daniel spoke of two different events. And you read it. Go home and read Daniel chapter 8 and 9. They are significantly two different events.